You are not even close to getting away with this, Troy Anderson said, his voice steady, yet laced with disbelief. Ksyra froze, her hand inches away from the control panel of the spaceship. Her pointed ears twitched, and she slowly turned around, her violet eyes locking with Troy's. For a moment, time seemed to stretch. "Do you honestly think you can stop me?" she said, her voice calm, as if Troy was the one in the wrong. "I think I just did." Troy's hand hovered over the blaster at his side. He'd trained for this moment, after all, preparing for the day someone might try to steal his ship, a vessel unlike anything else in the galaxy. Ksyra's lips curled into a sly smile, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of something, an emotion Troy couldn't quite read. "I could have had you in a second," she muttered, taking a step forward, her boots making no sound on the metal floor. "But you don't know what's really going on here, do you, Troy?" Troy narrowed his eyes. "What's that supposed to mean?" Before she could answer, the ground beneath their feet rumbled. The spaceport around them shook violently, and the screech of distant explosions echoed through the cold metal walls. Ksyra's expression shifted from cocky defiance to something else. Fear? No. It was something deeper, more urgent. "You're not the real problem here," she said, her voice now tight with a mix of anxiety and determination. "They are." Troy instinctively stepped back, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "Who the hell is they?" The answer came not in words, but in the form of a massive shadow looming over the port. Dozens of sleek, dark ships suddenly dropped from the sky, their engines roaring as they descended like vultures ready to strike. Ksyra glanced up, her hands shaking. "My enemies. The ones you don't want to get caught up with." Troy's mind raced. Aliens were rare, dangerous, even rarer. But this was unlike anything he'd ever seen. "You've got to be kidding me," Troy muttered, watching the ships circle like predators. "So, who exactly are you running from?" "I'm not running from them," Ksyra said with a smirk. "I'm trying to get away from something far worse. And if you know what's good for you, you'll help me." Troy raised an eyebrow, lowering his blaster just a little. "I don't even know who you are." She stepped closer, so close he could almost feel the warmth radiating off her. "Let me explain," Ksyra said softly. "I'm Ksyra, of the Lyran dynasty. And the ship you're trying to protect? It's not just any ship. It's the last one of its kind, a vessel capable of doing, well, things no one should have access to." Troy's grip tightened on his weapon. "And you think I'm just gonna hand it over?" "Not hand it over." Ksyra's smile returned, but it was more than just a grin. It was a warning. "You're going to help me. Because, whether you like it or not, you just became part of something way bigger than yourself." Before Troy could respond, an explosion sounded from the far side of the spaceport. The ship's engines roared to life, the air trembling with their power. Ksyra grabbed his arm and yanked him toward the ship. "Come on, we don't have much time." "They're coming." Troy was about to protest, about to remind her that he didn't even trust her, let alone follow her lead, when a shrill, haunting screech filled the air. They weren't alone anymore. Troy's instincts kicked in, his military training snapping into place. "Get to the ship, now!" he barked, pushing Ksyra toward the entrance. But as they neared the ship, the unmistakable sound of gunfire erupted from above, tearing through the air. The sky lit up with explosions. The battle was on. As Troy helped Ksyra into the ship's control room, he could hear the hum of the engines powering up behind him. His fingers gripped the control console with purpose, but his mind was miles away, struggling to process the insanity unfolding before him. "Talk," Troy demanded, his voice tense. "Who are they? What's going on?" Ksyra slid into the co-pilot seat, her violet eyes darkened with worry. "They are the Zorrath, hunters from the farthest reaches of the galaxy. You've probably never heard of them because they keep to the shadows, but trust me, they know how to hunt. And they want this ship. They want what it can do." Troy's eyes darted to the view screen, where he saw the Zorrath ships approaching, their sleek designs casting menacing silhouettes against the cosmic expanse. "Why do they want the ship?" Ksyra hesitated. "Because it's the only one capable of finding the Tesseract, the source of all energy in this galaxy. If they get their hands on it, the galaxy will be theirs." All of it. Troy's heart raced. You're talking about a weapon? Ksyra nodded. Not just any weapon. A power source that could destroy entire civilizations. If they activate it, the Zorrath will rule everything. Troy felt his stomach churn. And you think I'm just going to help you stop them? Ksyra looked at him, her eyes pleading but also resolute. I don't think you have a choice. You're already in this. Now, we need to get away, fast. Just as she finished speaking, an alarm blared through the ship, signaling a breach. The Zorrath were boarding. Troy didn't have time to think. He slammed his hand on the thrusters, and the ship jolted forward. They were leaving the spaceport, but the real fight was only beginning. The ship shot forward, its engines howling with a power Troy had never felt before. He gripped the controls, sweat beading on his forehead as the spaceport fell away behind them. The stars outside the viewport streaked by like bright ribbons of light, but there was no time to enjoy the view. Ksyra was tense beside him, her eyes flicking to the radar as she quickly began typing commands into her console. They're right behind us, she muttered, her voice tight with urgency. We need to shake them off. Troy's fingers danced over the controls, but he could feel the pressure mounting. This wasn't just about escaping anymore. The Zorrath had made it clear they weren't going to let them go easily. Troy's mind raced as he tried to think of a way out. The ship was powerful, but it was still just one ship against a fleet. How far can we push this thing? He asked, his gaze flicking between Ksyra and the rapidly approaching enemy ships. Ksyra's eyes glowed faintly in the dim light of the cockpit, a mix of determination and something else. Fear, maybe. This ship, it's capable of more than you know. But we're going to need to jump. Troy frowned. Jump? You mean hyperspace? Exactly. But I can't do it unless we have clear space. We need to outrun them first. Before Troy could respond, a sudden jolt threw him forward, and he quickly slammed his hands against the controls to stabilize the ship. The Zorrath ships had already launched their attack. Blaster fire streaked through the void, slamming against the ship's shields with a deafening crack. We're taking damage, Troy shouted. I know. Ksyra snapped back, her fingers flying across the console. Hold on. Troy swore under his breath as he yanked the controls, evading another round of fire. He could feel the ship's engine strain beneath him, pushing it beyond its limits. Damn it. Why is this happening? He muttered, sweat trickling down his neck. Ksyra turned to him, her expression hardening. Because you're involved now. Because I needed you to help me. And you're not going to get out of this unless you trust me. Troy didn't know if he could trust her. Everything was happening so fast. She had shown up out of nowhere, tried to steal his ship, and now they were in the middle of a space battle with alien bounty hunters. But something in her voice, the desperation, the conviction, it struck a chord with him. Another blast rocked the ship, and this time, the hull groaned as the shield flickered. We can't take much more of this, Troy said through gritted teeth. We need to jump now. Ksyra nodded, her fingers working furiously as she keyed in the coordinates. We're ready, but we might not survive the jump if we don't clear them. Troy's mind raced. The Zorrath ships were closing in fast, and there was only one thing to do. I've got an idea. Follow my lead. Without waiting for a response, Troy flipped a switch, activating a series of cloaking systems he had only heard of but never tested. The ship shimmered for a brief second, becoming nearly invisible to the enemy radar. The Zorrath fleet hesitated, briefly unsure of their target's location. Troy grinned. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give them a fighting chance. He pulled the ship into a hard dive, evading another round of fire. Get ready to jump, he shouted. Ksyra quickly nodded, her face pale but focused. Ready on my end. The seconds felt like hours as Troy swerved the ship, dodging the Zorrath's assault. They were dangerously close now. Too close. And then, with a final desperate push, Troy slammed his hand onto the hyperdrive lever. The stars outside twisted into streaks of light, and the ship lurched forward with a deafening roar. They were gone. The jump felt like an eternity. The universe around them was nothing but swirling colors, collapsing in on itself as the ship tore through hyperspace. Troy gritted his teeth, trying to keep his focus. He had no idea where they were headed, but it had to be better than facing the Zorrath. Finally, the ship's engines calmed, and the void around them shifted back into the familiar sight of the galaxy. It was silent, eerily so. The constant hum of the ship's systems was the only sound that filled the cockpit. Ksyra slumped back in her seat, breathing heavily, her fingers pressed against her temples as if to steady herself. Her violet eyes flickered in the low light, showing signs of exhaustion. Troy didn't speak for a moment. He was trying to process what had just happened. What was happening? So, we made it? Ksyra nodded slowly, her voice low. For now, but it won't last. The Zorrath will track us eventually. Troy's mind raced. Then what? We just run forever? We can't run forever. Ksyra's voice was firm now. But we can fight back. Troy stared at her, trying to read her. How? Ksyra turned to him, her gaze unwavering. I have allies, and we need to find them before the Zorrath do. There are only hope. Troy stood up, his muscles stiff from the tension. Where do we start? Ksyra's eyes softened. First, we need to lay low. I've got a few places we can hide for a while, but once we're ready, we'll take the fight to the Zorrath. Troy nodded, resolve setting in. He didn't know what this fight would look like, or even if they could win. But one thing was certain. He wasn't going down without a fight. Troy glanced out the viewport. The stars now felt different. They didn't seem as comforting as they once had. He was no longer a solitary traveler, a lone explorer. No, now he was part of something much bigger. And as much as he hated to admit it, that terrified him. Ksyra stood from her seat and walked toward him, her pace measured. You don't have to do this, you know, she said quietly. Troy turned to face her. Yeah, but I'm not the type of guy who walks away from something like this. Good, Ksyra said, a small, genuine smile tugging at her lips. You might just be the one to turn the tide. Before Troy could respond, the ship's alarm blared again. Looks like we're not done yet, he said, already moving toward the controls. Ksyra stepped beside him, her voice now a whisper. Brace yourself. They found us. And just like that, the real battle began. The sound of the alarm blared through the ship once again. Troy's heart raced as he scanned the control panel. They found us, he muttered under his breath. Ksyra's hands flew over the controls beside him, her eyes flashing with determination. We can't outrun them a second time. The Zorrath are too fast, too powerful. We need to make a stand. Troy gritted his teeth. And what? Let them blow us out of the sky? Ksyra's gaze met his, the weight of their situation settling between them. If they destroy the ship, they destroy any chance of stopping the Tesseract. We can't let that happen. Troy took a deep breath. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't even sure he wanted to be part of whatever cosmic mess he'd just fallen into. But looking at Ksyra, seeing the fire in her eyes, the desperation, the hope, he knew this was bigger than him. Much bigger. We'll make it out of this, he said, his voice firm. He didn't know if he believed it, but if they were going to die today, he wasn't going to die on his knees. With renewed resolve, Troy fired up the weapon systems and turned the ship, facing the approaching Zorrath fleet. They were fast, too fast, but he had one advantage. The Lyran ship was designed for maneuverability. It could outrun and outweed its enemies if used correctly. But he needed Ksyra's expertise to make it work. I'm going to need you to power up the cloaking device again, Troy said, his hands moving swiftly over the controls. We need to buy time. Ksyra nodded, her voice steady. I'll activate it, but it won't last long. The Zorrath have advanced sensors. They'll catch us again if we don't act quickly. The ship shimmered and became nearly invisible to the enemy's scanners. For a brief moment, the Zorrath ships lost track of them, but the brief window of safety wasn't enough. The Zorrath knew exactly where they were headed. As the ship came out of cloaking, the Zorrath ships opened fire, their deadly energy blasts slicing through space. Troy yanked the controls to the left, narrowly avoiding a direct hit. Come on, he muttered, sweat dripping down his face. The ship swerved and dodged like a living thing, each twist and turn pushing the ship's systems to their limits. We need to get to the outskirts of the system, Ksyra said urgently. The Zorrath have tracking stations at the core, but out here we can hide in the asteroid belt. Troy nodded without speaking, his hands moving with a precision honed by years of experience. The ship was responding well, but the Zorrath ships were relentless. They were closing in, their advanced weapons blasting chunks out of the asteroid field, turning the space around them into a chaotic storm of debris. "Hold on," Troy shouted as he pushed the ship into a dangerous spin, avoiding another barrage of fire. The ship screamed through the debris field, narrowly missing giant asteroids. The Zorrath, however, had no trouble navigating the field, their ships moving with cold precision. Ksyra's face was a mask of concentration as she monitored the ship systems. "We don't have much left. If they hit us again, we won't be able to jump out of here. Then we'll have to make sure they don't hit us," Troy said, determination flooding his voice. With a sudden, unexpected jolt, the ship veered violently to the right as a Zorrath ship fired directly at them. The shields flickered once more before going down entirely. For a second, everything went silent. Ksyra gasped, "Troy, get us ready to jump." Troy snapped, his mind working fast. "I'll hold them off." Ksyra hesitated, eyes wide. "You can't." "I can," he said firmly. "Just get the jump drive ready." She swallowed, nodding as she frantically worked to stabilize the jump coordinates. Troy's heart pounded in his chest. He had no idea how he was going to do this, but there was no other option. The Zorrath ships came into full view, weapons charged. They were about to unleash a devastating volley. But Troy wasn't ready to give up just yet. He pulled the emergency lever, flooding the ship with all remaining power to the forward weapon systems. A blinding light shot from the ship's cannons, catching the Zorrath off guard. For a moment, the ship's unexpected strike sent them reeling, giving Troy a precious few seconds. "Now!" Troy shouted, knowing this was their only shot. Ksyra, with no hesitation, slammed her hands onto the jump controls. The ship lurched forward, and in an instant, the stars around them stretched and twisted as they jumped into hyperspace. When they finally came out of the jump, it was into a new system, a cold, desolate space on the edge of the galaxy. The stars here were sparse, their light distant, almost indifferent. Troy let out a slow breath, looking around. "We made it." Ksyra slumped back in her seat, visibly exhausted but with a look of relief. "We did, for now." Troy turned to her, his mind still racing. "So, what now? We're not safe here. The Zorrath will catch up sooner or later." Ksyra's eyes hardened, the faintest glow still present in her violet irises. "We wait. We regroup. And we prepare to take the fight to them." Troy's mind raced, but something about Ksyra's determination calmed him. Maybe she wasn't just some thief trying to steal his ship. Maybe she was the key to something far greater than either of them had imagined. As the stars continued their slow dance outside the ship's viewport, Troy realized one thing. This wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a fight for the future of the galaxy, and he was right in the middle of it. The days that followed were full of tense silence, broken only by brief moments of planning and preparation. The Zorrath ships had given chase, but they had to recover from their initial losses before they could make another attempt at capturing Ksyra and her ship. The two of them had few resources left, but Troy knew that with Ksyra's knowledge of the galaxy and its many hidden factions, they stood a fighting chance. They spent their time hiding in the quiet corners of space, learning about their enemy and gathering any intelligence they could. Troy came to understand the true scope of the Zorrath's mission. They weren't just conquerors, they were hunters, and the Tesseract was their prey. Ksyra had a plan, one that required forging alliances with unlikely factions, ancient races long forgotten by the rest of the galaxy. It was a long shot, but Troy had seen enough to know that this was their only hope. In time, their ragtag alliance began to take shape. Other factions joined their cause, fellow rebels, mercenaries, and even a few rogue scientists who had been studying the Tesseract's energy signature. They weren't the strongest, nor the most organized, but they had one thing the Zorrath didn't: determination. And with that, Troy and Ksyra prepared for the next battle, a battle not just for survival, but for the fate of the entire galaxy.